The dust kicked up from beneath his horse's hooves as Jake Morrison rode into the small town of Cedar Valley. His weathered face told stories of countless days under the burning sun, and his eyes held a sadness that seemed to run deeper than the nearby canyon. The town looked peaceful enough, with its wooden buildings lined up along the main street like soldiers standing at attention. Jake had been riding for 3 weeks straight, following a lead that might bring him closer to finding the woman who had disappeared from his life 5 years ago. Sarah Mackenzie had vanished without a trace one morning, leaving behind only a hastily written note that said she had to go, that it wasn't safe for her to stay. Those words had haunted Jake every single day since then. The general store owner, an elderly man with kind eyes, watched as Jake tied his horse to the hitching post. "You look like you've been riding hard, stranger," the man called out. "Name's William Hayes. I own this store, and most folks around here know me." Jake tipped his hat politely. "Jake Morrison. I'm looking for someone who might have passed through here. A woman with auburn hair and green eyes. Goes by Sarah Mackenzie, though she might be using a different name now." William's expression grew thoughtful. "Can't say I recall anyone by that description recently. But you're welcome to ask around. The saloon keeper might know more. Travelers often stop there for a drink and conversation." Jake thanked the man and walked his horse down the street toward the saloon. The building looked well-maintained, with fresh paint and clean windows. As he pushed through the swinging doors, the familiar smell of whiskey and tobacco filled his nostrils. The place was quiet, with only a few locals nursing their drinks at scattered tables. Behind the bar stood a woman with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked up as Jake approached, her sharp eyes taking in his dusty clothes and tired appearance. "What can I get you, cowboy?" she asked with a friendly smile. "Whiskey, and some information if you've got it," Jake replied, settling onto a bar stool. The woman poured his drink and set it before him. "Information about what?" she asked, leaning against the bar with interest. Jake described Sarah again, watching the woman's face carefully for any sign of recognition. The bartender listened intently, then shook her head slowly. "Sorry, hun. Haven't seen anyone like that. But there's been talk about a woman living up in the old cabin near Willow Creek. Been there about 4 years now. Keeps to herself mostly." Jake's heart jumped, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "This woman at the cabin, what does she look like?" "Hard to say. Only seen her from a distance when she comes to town for supplies. Always wears a bonnet that covers most of her face. But she's got the right build, I suppose. Quiet type, pays in cash, never causes any trouble." Jake finished his whiskey in one gulp and left money on the bar. "How do I get to this cabin?" The woman gave him detailed directions, warning him that the trail could be tricky in places. Jake thanked her and headed back to his horse, his mind racing with possibilities. After 5 long years of searching, he might finally be close to finding Sarah. The ride to Willow Creek took him through beautiful country. Rolling hills covered in green grass stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with clusters of oak trees that provided welcome shade. A clear stream ran alongside the trail, its gentle babbling providing a peaceful soundtrack to his journey. As Jake rode, his thoughts drifted back to the life he and Sarah had shared. They had met in a small town in Texas, where Sarah worked as a school teacher. Jake had been passing through, planning to stay only long enough to rest his horse and resupply. But one look at Sarah's bright smile and intelligent eyes had changed everything. She had been different from other women he'd known. Sarah could discuss literature and politics with equal passion, but she also wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty helping with ranch work. She had a laugh that could light up a room and a way of looking at the world that made even ordinary things seem special. They had spent 2 wonderful years together, making plans for the future. Jake had saved enough money to buy a small ranch, and they had talked about marriage, about starting a family. Everything seemed perfect until that terrible morning when he woke up to find her gone. The note she left had been brief, but devastating. "Jake, I have to leave. There are things about my past that I never told you, things that make it dangerous for me to stay. Please don't try to find me. I love you, but this is the only way to keep you safe. Sarah." Jake had ignored her warning, of course. How could he not try to find the woman he loved? He had searched everywhere, following every lead, no matter how slim. The trail had gone cold so many times that he'd almost given up hope. But something inside him wouldn't let him quit. Some stubborn part of his heart that refused to believe their story was over. The sun was starting to set as Jake finally spotted the cabin the bartender had described. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees, with Willow Creek running just behind it. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a small garden grew beside the front porch. The place looked peaceful and well-maintained. Jake dismounted and tied his horse to a tree, his hands shaking slightly with nervous anticipation. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to say or do. What if it wasn't Sarah? What if it was her, but she didn't want to see him? He walked slowly toward the cabin, his boots crunching softly on the fallen leaves. As he got closer, he could hear someone moving around inside. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of a woman with her back to him, her hair covered by a scarf. Jake climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch and raised his hand to knock. Before his knuckles could touch the door, it suddenly swung open. Standing before him was the woman he had been searching for all these years. "Hello, Jake," Sarah said softly, her green eyes filling with tears. "I've been wondering when you'd find me." She looked older, of course, but still beautiful. Her auburn hair was longer now, and there were small lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But her smile was the same one that had captured his heart years ago. Jake felt like he couldn't breathe. "Sarah," he whispered, reaching out to touch her face as if to make sure she was real. "I've looked for you everywhere." "I know," she said, stepping back to let him inside. "I've been careful, but I knew you wouldn't give up. You're too stubborn for your own good." The cabin was small but comfortable, with handmade furniture and quilts that added warmth to the space. Books lined one wall, and Jake noticed they were mostly the same authors Sarah had loved before. The sight of those familiar titles made his chest tight with emotion. "Why did you leave?" Jake asked, the question that had tormented him for 5 years finally spoken aloud. "And don't tell me it was to protect me." "I can take care of myself." Sarah gestured for him to sit at the small wooden table while she put on a pot of coffee. Her movements were graceful and familiar, bringing back a flood of memories. "It's complicated, Jake. There are people from my past, dangerous people who were looking for me. I couldn't risk them finding me with you." "What people?" "What did you do?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the darkening sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My real name isn't Sarah Mackenzie. It's Sarah Collins, and my father was a federal judge in Missouri." Jake felt his world shift slightly. "Was? He was murdered 6 years ago, along with my mother and younger brother. The men who killed them were part of a gang my father had sent to prison. They wanted revenge, and they got it." Sarah's hands trembled as she poured the coffee. "I was supposed to die that night too, but I wasn't home. I was at a friend's house studying late." The pieces started falling into place for Jake. "So you changed your name and ran?" "I had to. The gang knew I had witnessed some of their other crimes. They couldn't afford to let me testify against them. A friend of my father's, another judge, helped me disappear. He gave me new papers, a new identity, enough money to start over somewhere far away." Jake reached across the table and took her hands in his. They felt small and cold, despite the warmth from the fire. "But you're safe now. It's been years. Surely they've forgotten about you by now." Sarah shook her head sadly. "Men like that don't forget, Jake, and they don't give up. 3 months after I left you, they found the judge who helped me. They killed him and his whole family, including his 10-year-old daughter." The horror of what she was telling him hit Jake like a physical blow. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. How could you? I never told you about my past because I thought I was safe. I thought I could finally have a normal life, maybe even a happy one. But then I started getting letters." "What kind of letters?" Sarah stood and walked to a small wooden box on the mantel. She pulled out several pieces of paper and handed them to Jake. The handwriting was crude, but the message was clear. They knew where she was, and they were coming for her. The last one came a week after I left you, Sarah said, sitting back down. It had details about our life together, about you, about the ranch you wanted to buy. They threatened to kill you if I didn't come to them. Jake felt anger burning in his chest. So you just left? Without even telling me the truth? What choice did I have? I couldn't watch you die because of my past. I couldn't let you become another innocent victim of something. 3 days later, Jake and Sarah sat at the cabin's kitchen table with a collection of old newspapers and documents spread between them. Sarah had kept every piece of information she could find about the gang that had destroyed her family, studying them like a general preparing for battle. Look at this, Sarah said, pointing to a newspaper article dated 6 months earlier. 2 members of the Blackwood gang were killed in a shootout with federal marshals in Colorado. That leaves only 3 still alive. Jake studied the article carefully. The gang had originally consisted of 8 men, led by a ruthless killer named Marcus Blackwood. Over the years, law enforcement had managed to capture or kill most of them, but the core group had remained elusive. 3 men, Jake mused. Still dangerous, but not the army you've been running from. Sarah pulled out another document, this one official-looking with government seals. This is a letter from Deputy Marshal Thomas Crawford. He's been hunting the Blackwood gang for 7 years. He says they're believed to be hiding somewhere in the Arizona Territory. That's 300 miles from here, Jake observed. Maybe far enough that they're not an immediate threat. Or maybe close enough that they could find me if they really wanted to, Sarah countered. Jake, I need to tell you something else. Something I haven't mentioned. Jake felt his stomach tighten. What is it? Sarah stood and walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold despite the warm morning sun. The night my family died, I saw something. I was coming home late from my friend's house and I saw Marcus Blackwood himself leaving our property. But more than that, I saw him talking to someone else, someone I recognized. Who? Sheriff Coleman from our town. He was supposed to be one of the good ones, Jake. My father trusted him completely. But there he was, taking money from the man who had just murdered my family. The implications hit Jake like a thunderbolt. The sheriff was working with them. Not just working with them, protecting them. That's how they always seemed to stay one step ahead of the law. They had someone on the inside, feeding them information about federal investigations and martial movements. Jake ran his hands through his hair, trying to process this new information. Is he still alive? This sheriff? As far as I know, yes. He's probably still in Missouri, still wearing a badge, still pretending to be an honest lawman. Sarah's voice was filled with disgust. The worst part is, people probably still trust him. Sarah, this changes everything. If you could testify about what you saw, it might be enough to bring down the whole remaining gang, and get myself killed in the process. These men have nothing to lose now, Jake. They know if they're caught, they'll hang. They'd do anything to keep me from talking. Jake stood and moved to stand behind her at the window. What if they couldn't hurt you? What if we found a way to protect you while you testified? How? Hide behind federal marshals for the rest of my life. That's not living, Jake. That's just a different kind of prison. Maybe not, Jake said thoughtfully. What if we could get them to come to us? On our terms in a place where we have the advantage? Sarah turned to face him, her eyes wide with alarm. Jake, no. You're talking about using me as bait. It's too dangerous. I'm talking about ending this once and for all. Think about it, Sarah. As long as these men are alive, you'll never be truly free. You'll always be looking over your shoulder, always wondering if today is the day they find you. And your plan is to invite them to find me? Jake moved to the table and picked up one of the newspaper articles. Look at this pattern. Every time they've been caught or cornered, it's been because they made a mistake. They got overconfident, took unnecessary risks. Maybe we can use that against them? Sarah sat back down at the table, her expression troubled. What exactly are you proposing? We send word to Deputy Marshal Crawford. We tell him you're willing to testify, but only if he can guarantee the remaining gang members will be captured. Then we set up a meeting somewhere we can control the situation. You're talking about a trap. I'm talking about justice. For your family, for all the other innocent people they've killed. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring at the documents scattered across the table. Even if I agreed to this insane plan, how would we contact Crawford? How do we know he's not corrupt too? Your father's friend, the judge who helped you disappear. Did he ever mention Crawford? Actually, yes. Judge Harrison spoke highly of him. Said he was one of the few federal officers who couldn't be bought. Sarah's expression grew sad. Of course, Judge Harrison paid for his honesty with his life. Then Crawford is our best bet. We contact him, tell him the situation, and see what he can do. Jake could see the internal battle playing out on Sarah's face. She wanted to be free, to reclaim her life, but the fear of putting both of them in danger was overwhelming. Let me ask you something, Jake said gently. If we do nothing, if we just stay here and try to hide for the rest of our lives, will you ever really be happy? Will either of us? Sarah considered his question carefully. No, she admitted finally. I'll always wonder if they're coming. Every strange sound at night, every unexpected visitor to town, I'll think it might be them. Then we have to try. Maybe it's dangerous, but doing nothing is dangerous too. All right, Sarah said suddenly, surprising them both with her decision. All right, let's do it. Let's contact Crawford and see if he can help us end this. Jake felt a mixture of relief and terror. Are you sure? No, I'm not sure at all. But you're right about one thing. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. If there's a chance to get my life back, I have to take it. The next morning, Jake rode into Cedar Valley to send a telegraph to Deputy Marshal Crawford. The message was simple and direct. Sarah Collins alive and willing to testify. Need protection and plan to capture remaining Blackwood gang members. Reply urgent. While they waited for a response, Jake and Sarah spent their time preparing. Jake cleaned and checked his guns, making sure they were in perfect working order. Sarah practiced with the rifle Jake had brought, surprised to find that her natural coordination served her well with firearms. I never thought I'd need to learn how to shoot, she said after hitting 3 bottles in a row at 50 yards. Hopefully, you won't need to use it, Jake replied. But it's better to have the skill and not need it than to need it and not have it. On the 3rd day, a return telegram arrived. Crawford was very interested in Sarah's offer and wanted to meet with them as soon as possible. He suggested a rendezvous at an abandoned mining camp halfway between their location and his current position in Colorado. He says he can be there in 5 days with a small team of trusted men. Jake reported after reading the telegram. He also says he has new information about the gang's current whereabouts. Sarah felt her stomach flutter with nervous energy. So this is really happening. Only if you're still sure you want to do this. We can change our minds right up until the moment we meet with him. No, Sarah said firmly. I've made my decision. Let's go get our lives back. The journey to the abandoned mining camp took them through some of the most beautiful country either of them had ever seen. Rolling meadows filled with wildflowers gave way to towering mountain peaks capped with snow. They rode side by side, sometimes talking, sometimes comfortable in silence. Tell me about the ranch you wanted to buy, Sarah said as they stopped to rest their horses beside a clear mountain stream. Jake's face lit up at the memory. It was perfect, Sarah. 300 acres of good grazing land, a house that just needed a little work, and a barn big enough for 20 horses. There was even a small orchard behind the house. What happened to it? I let the option expire when I couldn't find you. Couldn't bring myself to build that life without you. Jake's voice grew thoughtful. But the land's still for sale. Owner told me last year that if I ever changed my mind, the price would be the same. Sarah smiled, the first truly happy expression Jake had seen on her face since he'd found her. Maybe when this is all over, we could take a look at it together. I'd like that more than anything. They reached the mining camp just as the sun was setting on the 4th day. The place was truly abandoned, with wooden buildings slowly surrendering to the elements and rusted, mining equipment scattered around like the bones of some great beast. But it was also defensible, with clear sight lines in all directions and only a few approaches that could be watched easily. Crawford, and his men hadn't arrived yet. So Jake and Sarah set up camp in the old mine office, a stone building that offered good protection and a view of the entire camp. They built a small fire and prepared a simple meal, both of them too nervous to eat much. "Jake," Sarah said as they sat watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky, "whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these last few days with you have been the happiest I've had in 5 years." "For me too," Jake replied, taking her hand. "And whatever Crawford has to tell us, whatever plan he has, we'll face it together." "Promise me something," Sarah said suddenly. "If things go wrong, if it looks like the gang is going to capture us, promise me you'll run. Don't try to be a hero. Just get away and live your life." "I can't promise that, Sarah. I won't leave you again." "Jake, please. If something happens to me, at least one of us should have a chance at happiness." The town of Esperanza sat like a dusty jewel in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by desert scrub and distant mountains. Sarah rode in alone as planned, while Jake and the federal marshals took positions around the settlement. The hotel was a 2-story adobe building with thick walls and small windows. Perfect for defense if things went badly. Sarah signed the register using her real name, her hand trembling slightly as she wrote Sarah Collins for the first time in over 5 years. The hotel clerk, a thin man with nervous eyes, glanced at the signature but said nothing. Within an hour, news of her presence would spread throughout the small town. Just as Crawford had predicted, from her second-floor room, Sarah could see most of the main street. Somewhere out there, Jake was watching and waiting, ready to protect her if the plan went wrong. The knowledge gave her courage, but couldn't completely calm her racing heart. By evening, Sarah had made herself visible around town, asking questions about travel to Mexico and purchasing supplies for a long journey. She played the role of a frightened woman on the run, looking over her shoulder and jumping at unexpected sounds. It wasn't difficult to act scared. She genuinely was terrified. Jake watched from the livery stable, dressed as a drifter looking for work. Crawford had positioned his men strategically around the town, each one appearing to be an ordinary citizen going about their business. The sheriff, Martinez, had quietly evacuated most of the real townspeople, leaving only those who could handle themselves in a fight. As night fell, everyone settled in to wait. The plan was for Sarah to stay in her room, visible through the window, while the lawmen watched for any sign of the approaching gang. If Crawford was right, Blackwood and his remaining men would strike before dawn, hoping to catch their target while she slept. Sarah tried to read a book by lamplight, but the words swam before her eyes. Every sound from the street below made her heart jump. A dog barking, horses passing by, the distant sound of laughter from the saloon, all of it seemed ominous in the darkness. At 2 a.m, Jake spotted them. 3 riders approaching from the south, moving carefully and staying in the shadows. He recognized Marcus Blackwood from the wanted posters, a tall man with a black beard and cold eyes that seemed to see everything. The other 2 men were younger but looked equally dangerous. Jake signaled to Crawford, who was positioned in the general store across from the hotel. The marshal nodded and passed the signal to his other men. Everyone was in position, weapons ready, waiting for the gang to make their move. Blackwood and his men dismounted at the edge of town, leaving their horses with the youngest member while Blackwood and the other man approached the hotel on foot. They moved like predators, silent and deadly, clearly experienced at this kind of work. Sarah saw them through her window and felt ice run through her veins. After 5 years of nightmares, the monster was finally here. Marcus Blackwood looked exactly as she remembered him, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that would haunt your dreams. The man with him was smaller but somehow seemed even more dangerous. The plan called for Sarah to wait until they were inside the hotel, before the lawmen moved. But as she watched Blackwood check his gun and start toward the building, she felt panic rising in her throat. What if the marshals were too late? What if Jake was too far away to help? Blackwood entered the hotel through the back door, having picked the lock with practiced ease. His partner covered the front entrance while Blackwood climbed the stairs toward Sarah's room. Each step brought him closer to the woman who could destroy what remained of his gang. Sarah, pressed herself against the wall beside her door, clutching the small pistol Jake had given her. Her breathing was so loud she was sure Blackwood would hear it through the thin walls. The floorboards in the hallway creaked under his weight as he moved closer. Jake watched from across the street, every muscle in his body tense with the need to act. Crawford had made him promise to wait for the signal, but seeing Blackwood inside the same building as Sarah was almost more than he could bear. The gang leader stopped outside Sarah's door and listened for a moment. Inside the room, Sarah held her breath, praying that he would think she was asleep and wouldn't notice the lamp that was still burning. After what felt like an eternity, Blackwood tried the door handle. The door was locked, of course, but that presented no problem for a man of Blackwood's experience. He produced a set of lockpicks and went to work, the small tools making barely audible scratching sounds as he manipulated the mechanism. Sarah knew she had perhaps 30 seconds before he was inside. She moved to the window and held up a lamp, the signal that meant immediate danger. Across the street, Crawford saw the light and gave his men the go-ahead. The lock clicked open just as gunfire erupted in the street below. Blackwood cursed and kicked the door open, rushing into the room with his gun drawn. But instead of a helpless victim, he found Sarah standing by the window with her pistol aimed at his chest. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Remember me?" Blackwood's eyes widened with recognition and rage. "Sarah Collins, the little girl who's caused me so much trouble. The woman who's going to see you hang for murdering my family." "Not if you're dead," Blackwood snarled. Raising his gun, the next few seconds unfolded in a blur of violence and chaos. Sarah fired first, her bullet catching Blackwood in the shoulder and spinning him around. He stumbled but didn't fall, bringing his own weapon up with his good hand before he could fire. Jake burst through the window in an explosion of glass and wood. He had climbed up from the street, unable to wait any longer when he heard the gunshot from Sarah's room. He tackled Blackwood around the waist, and both men crashed to the floor. The gang leader was bigger and more experienced, but Jake fought with the fury of a man protecting the woman he loved. They rolled across the floor, each trying to gain control of Blackwood's gun. Sarah watched in horror, unable to get a clear shot without risking hitting Jake down in the street. Crawford and his men were engaged in a fierce gunfight with the other two gang members. The younger man had been wounded early and was hiding behind a water trough. But the third member was proving to be a formidable opponent. Back in the hotel room, Jake managed to knock Blackwood's gun away, but the older man responded by pulling a knife from his boot. The blade flashed in the lamplight as he slashed at Jake's throat, missing by inches. "You should have minded your own business, Cowboy," Blackwood gasped, blood from his shoulder wound making him weaker with each passing moment. "She is my business," Jake replied, dodging another swipe of the knife. "She's my whole life." Sarah saw her chance and took it. While the two men were locked in their deadly struggle, she moved closer and brought the butt of her pistol down hard on the back of Blackwood's head. The gang leader collapsed instantly, the knife clattering across the floor. Jake rolled away and got to his feet, pulling Sarah into his arms. "Are you hurt?" he asked, checking her for injuries. "I'm fine," she gasped, adrenaline making her shake. "Is he dead?" Jake checked Blackwood's pulse. "No, but he's not going anywhere." That was a good hit. The gunfire in the street had stopped, and they could hear Crawford shouting orders to his men. A few minutes later, the marshal appeared in the doorway, his gun drawn but pointed at the floor. "Everyone all right up here?" he asked, taking in the scene. "We're fine," Jake replied. "Blackwood's alive but unconscious." "Good, we want him alive for trial." Crawford looked at Sarah with admiration. "You did well, Miss Collins. Your father would be proud." As they bound Blackwood's hands and tended to his wounds, Crawford filled them in on what had happened in the street. "We got all three of them. One dead, one wounded, and this one for the hangman's rope. The Blackwood gang is finished." Sarah felt as if a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. After 5 years of fear and hiding, the nightmare was finally over. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you come with us to testify at the trial. But after that, you're free to live your life however you choose." 2 months later, Jake and Sarah stood on the porch of a small ranch house, watching the sun set over their own land. The trial had gone exactly as expected. Blackwood and his surviving partner had been convicted and sentenced to hang. The corrupt sheriff in Missouri had been arrested and would spend the rest of his life in prison. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, taking in the view of rolling pastures and distant mountains. "Even more beautiful than you described." Jake wrapped his arms around her from behind, still hardly able to believe that she was really there, really his. "Wait until you see it in the spring when the wildflowers bloom. The whole valley turns into a carpet of color." They had been married a week after the trial, in a simple ceremony with Crawford and his men as witnesses. Sarah had insisted on using her real name for the first time in years, reclaiming her identity along with her freedom. "Jake," Sarah said, turning in his arms to face him, "I have something to tell you. What is it?" Sarah smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. "We're going to have a baby." Jake felt his heart stop and then start again, faster than before. "A baby? Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I saw the doctor in town yesterday while you were meeting with the bank about the cattle loan.